Okay, we're going to continue our discussion on epistemology, and we're going to talk about a couple rationalists on epistemology. We defined rationalism in the last lecture. Today we're going to talk, first of all, about René Descartes on his views on epistemology. Now, we previously discussed Descartes' methodological doubt, how he doubted everything to see if there was something that he could not doubt, something about which he could be certain. And he arrived at the conclusion, I think, therefore I am. Of that he thought he could be certain. Now, behind this process was the acceptance that knowledge is justified true belief, and we talked about that previously. But for Descartes, for a belief to be justified, a belief must be shown to be necessarily true or certain. Certainty means beyond any logically possible doubt. His first certainty is that he thought, and that in order to think, he had to exist. So having ideas and thinking are something of which we can be certain, says Descartes. They represent what he calls clear and distinct ideas. They are foundational to knowing. In fact, Descartes' epistemology is an example of an epistemological theory called Foundationalism. I'm now going to give you a definition of foundationalism that will appear on your final exam. So, foundationalism. Foundationalism is the theory in epistemology that some beliefs are so basic that they are self-justifying and self-evident. So again, the entire definition is, foundationalism is the theory in epistemology that some beliefs are so basic that they are self-justifying and self-evident. So, just to know them is to know their certainty. You can base other ideas upon them because they provide a foundation of certainty. Foundational ideas are also called innate ideas. And the word innate is spelled I-N-N-A-T-E. I'm now going to give you a definition of innate ideas that will appear on your final exam. So you want to write it down. Innate ideas are ideas that are naturally present in the mind but are not learned through experience. So again, innate ideas, the definition. Innate ideas are ideas that are naturally present in the mind but are not learned through experience. Examples that have sometimes been cited as examples of innate ideas are statements like causes have effects, or time is linear, or 1 + 1 = 2. The idea being that if you understand an effect, you implicitly understand a cause. Or that if you understand time, you understand naturally that time is necessarily linear, and so on. But Descartes soon arrives at another certainty. He gets it from his idea of an infinitely perfect being, which he calls God. He argues everything that is real has a cause for its being real. So everything that's real has a cause for its being real. And every cause must be equal to or greater than its effect. So that means that a cause can't be lesser than its effect. It has at least to be equal to it, if not greater than it. Then he says, my idea of God is an idea of something that is infinitely perfect. So that idea contains in it an infinite degree of perfection. So when I think of God, he says, I think of a being who's infinitely perfect. So that must mean that there's an infinite degree of perfection in my idea of an infinitely perfect being. Since my idea of God exists, Descartes argues, my idea must have a cause. That cause of my idea, he goes on to argue, must have as much perfection as is contained in its effect. That is, the effect being my idea of God as being an infinitely perfect being. So, if a cause must be equal to or greater than its effect, then my idea of an infinitely perfect being must have that much greatness and that much perfection about it. And then he says, the only possible cause of my idea of God is God himself. Therefore, the only possible ultimate cause of my idea of an infinitely perfect God is an actually existing infinitely perfect God. So, God has to be responsible for causing the idea of God. Therefore, it's certain, says Descartes, that God exists. Now, there's much about this argument that is subject to potential criticism, but I won't dwell on that today. But that becomes a foundation for other kinds of knowledge, as we shall see. Now, he also goes on to argue that I can also be certain that God is my creator by using the same kind of reasoning. My idea of a perfect creator can only come from an actually existing perfect creator, using the same kind of logic. Because God is infinitely perfect, says Descartes, he will not allow me to be deceived when I use my faculty of reason correctly, because it was by that faculty I was enabled to arrive at the certainty of God's existence. So, by using reason, I was able to arrive at the existence of God. And so God's not going to allow me to be deceived by that faculty when I use it correctly. So that means, therefore, says Descartes, I can trust the judgments I make based on the faculty of reason. So reason is the vehicle by which we can know. So that's Descartes' epistemology in a nutshell. Now let me give you another rationalist epistemology, the epistemology of a man by the name of Gottfried Leibniz. Now Leibniz wanted to explore ideas thoroughly to discover their components. He wanted to see what they were made of. He also wanted to know what made some ideas better than others. And he does this by making a distinction between what he calls clear and obscure ideas. So on the one hand, there's clear ideas, on the others, there's obscure ideas. He says an idea is clear when it allows one to recognize the thing it represents. It's obscure when it does not. For example, if I see an object walking at a distance and my idea is correct that it is a dog, my idea is clear. But if my idea of it is wrong, or if I cannot formulate an idea of what it is, my idea is obscure. So, the distinction is between clear and obscure ideas. Continuing his thinking about clear ideas, he realizes that clear ideas come in two classes. The first class is distinct ideas, and the second one is confused ideas. So those are the two classes of clear ideas. A clear idea is distinct when I can differentiate and count all the characteristics of something that makes it what it is. For example, when I can differentiate and count all the characteristics of dogs in general and a Labrador Retriever in particular. But if I cannot do that with my clear idea, then my idea is confused. That is, although I am clear that the animal is a dog, I might be confused about what all dogs have in common and what the Labrador Retriever I'm seeing has distinctly. So clear ideas can be either distinct or confused. But he's not done yet. Now he says clear ideas can also be either adequate or inadequate. Our clear ideas are adequate when one has distinct knowledge of the idea itself and its component parts. And what he means by that is the first concepts which compose an idea. But when our clear ideas do not come with knowledge of its component parts, then our clear ideas are inadequate. So what this means is that for Leibniz, the best ideas are clear, distinct, and adequate. And then he goes on to say that the highest form of knowledge is intuition. And he defines intuition as when one has a clear, distinct, and adequate idea immediately. But he says, only divine knowers are capable of intuitive knowledge. And that would be God, of course. Okay. Now, Leibniz also embraces, like most rationalists, the notion of innate ideas. And this is what he says about it. He says empirical knowledge, or knowledge that's derived from the senses, can show that something is the case, but cannot show that something is necessarily the case. The human mind, however, has knowledge of necessary truths, such as the laws of arithmetic and geometry. These necessary truths, which Leibniz calls the truths of reason, are ideas whose opposite is impossible. They are eternal truths, which obtain in all possible worlds. So, for example, you can't go to some other world and 2 plus 2 not equal 4. Because the truths of reason require no empirical data, Leibniz concludes that they are innate to the mind. They're just part of the structure of the mind. Leibniz contrasts innate ideas with what he calls truths of fact. And truths of fact are contingent truths whose opposite is possible, and knowledge of which requires experience, or empirical experience. Thank you.